This just revealed the Cavs' secret weapon. An article coming out recently dissecting all the different lineups of the Cleveland Cavaliers, what worked, what didn't work, and what can stay the same as the team made some roster moves in this past offseason, but what can remain the same as the Cavs move to the 2025-26 season. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Cavs Digest. I'm your host for today, Darayus Sethna. It's good to be back on the show here as we go from July to August. And it's been a pretty busy pretty busy time in sports here in the Cleveland area, and none of it is Cavs related. Okay, Browns training camp, there is news going out in Berea every single day. The Cleveland Guardians are dealing with some players gambling issues, so there's been a lot of news to talk about that is non-Cavs related in the Cleveland sports scene. But I did find an article over this past week that was really intriguing, kind of more of a stat-heavy article that I wanted to kind of, dumb down in a sense. It once again came from, I mentioned this source a couple weeks ago, Fear the Sword. It is essentially a Cavs blogging website, kind of like what we do, but it's a lot more written content. But this was a really interesting article that I wanted to bring here to the channel. It's about the effectiveness of some of the Cavs' most used lineups from the 2024-25 season. As we know, Cavs win in 64 games, top seed in the Eastern Conference. Pretty disappointing ending to the season and the playoffs in the second round of the Pacers. We all know the story. So I think now it's really time to understand, hey, what worked from a holistic standpoint, what didn't work, and how are the players that were in these systems, what can stay the same with new players coming in this offseason. Obviously, coaching staff, Kenny Atkinson, the philosophy, the concepts are going to be the same, but how can the success of the offense last year be implemented this year with new players involved? So I want to get into this a little bit more. Specifically, the one lineup that was mentioned in this article was about Evan Mobley, and more specifically, Evan Mobley being surrounded by three-point shooters. If you take a look at some of the numbers that I'm about to present to you here, this shows that the Cavs were elite when Evan Mobley was the centerpiece with shooters around him. I mean, you look at, that lineup, this is before the DeAndre Hunter trade, but Donovan Mitchell's a shooter. I'd consider Darius Garland a shooter as well, but he's not up there. Caris LeVert, Sam Merrill, Niang, right? All those guys, when you think of their games, the first thing you think of are pure three-point shooters. Caris LeVert's a little bit more of a ball handler, but is more known for shooting the basketball. Right? But here's what stands out to me. Defensive rating, 99th percentile. Right? So they were clobbering, we're not letting teams score. The net rating, also 99th percentile. The offensive rating, to me, once again, very strong. The Cavs, really, with whatever lineup they had, were able to put points on the board. But this one stood out to me because it shows that Evan Mobley has truly made that leap. We saw it in him earning the Defensive Player of the Year, but also on the offensive side, just looking more confident, more spry, and not only evolving his game, but allowing his game to be a factor in making his teammates better, right? And that's why, more specifically, look at the shooters. Because Mobley was such a dominant force in the paint, his ability to handle the ball and make the passes and kick it back out to the shooters made this Cavs offense very effective and very unpredictable for opposing defenses. And two guys, as I mentioned, who really benefited from this, who are unfortunately no longer on the team, George Niang and Caris LeVert, right? Those pure shooters that I was talking about. George Niang was, shooting the lights out before the trade to Atlanta. Caris LeVert, like I said, could shoot the ball. I think the problem with him was he wanted to handle it a little bit more as he was used to playing in Brooklyn and Indiana, but that just wasn't what his role needed to be on this team, and I think it just didn't work out. But he had games where he shot the ball really well, and that was a product of what Evan Mobley was able to do inside. Let's get to some numbers here when it comes to Evan Mobley and a couple of these other guys. So starting with Evan here, really I saw, when I think of Evan Mobley's season this year, I just think of a guy who was super confident, right? The most confident that I've seen him play in his young NBA career. He flourished in this system with Kenny Atkinson. As we know, he was going to be the vocal point, not Donovan Mitchell, not Darius Garland, but Evan Mobley in Kenny Atkinson's offense, and it showed. You look at the efficiency from field goal percentage, about 56%, really upped his three-point shooting game, 37% from the field, and then you look in the paint, just dominant, right? 9 rebounds a game. Those assists, came, timely assists, 2 blocks per game. So really just doing it on both ends of the court. I think Evan Mobley is going to be one of the premier two-way players in the game in a couple years if he can continue to make these leaps offensively. And this past season was really the first year we saw Evan Mobley take that leap from an offensive standpoint. Additionally, you look at some of these shooters, right? Sam Merrill, he is staying, right? Signed an extension with the Cavs earlier this month or earlier in this offseason. And to me, once again, I talked about it in the video I made about Sam Merrill. It's shooting 41% from the field, about 37% from 3. That efficiency, at least in the regular season, that Merrill's going to come up clutch from the perimeter. That is his game. And I think if he can add a little more off the dribble type shooting, he can be a really dangerous player coming off the Cavs bench and really propelling that second unit for Cleveland. And then when you think about shooting, yes, he's not George Niang or maybe even Karis LeVert, but he's a really quality guy who can come into this Cavs second unit, and that's DeAndre Hunter, right? I talked about him a few weeks ago. He is the definition of a jack-of-all-trades type player. That Swiss Army knife who, if you need him to handle the ball, he can do that a little bit. But I think his game, especially with Evan Mobley on the floor, is going to be a lot of, be in the corner, catch and shoot, be ready to, shoot that basketball. And we've seen him have success in that style of offense. I feel very confident with DeAndre Hunter as a shooter. I think because he has the ability to put the ball on the floor as well, that only makes him more dangerous of a player on the offensive side of the basketball. So now going back to this article that I was talking about, there were a few other lineups that the article mentioned that I wanted to get into here. And it was, of course, the starting 5. Now, I think this is what the starting 5 should be moving into next season as well, despite some of the changes that were made at the trade deadline and in this past offseason. I think this lineup is incredibly effective. You've got 2 ball-dominant, creative guards in Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. Plus, Max Strus, talked about him last week, has the ability to just be that catch-and-shoot guy, doesn't need the ball in his hands. And then you have the 2 dominant forces down low, the Twin Towers, as we call them here in Cleveland, Tower City, Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. So this is a really, really interesting dynamic for me. Because when you look at, in the article, it talked about how, of course, we know how dominant they were in the regular season, but really that drop-off in the postseason is what really has all of us scratching our heads, right? Yeah, a minus 3.3 net rating, 30th percentile in the postseason, a 112 offensive rating. Look at those low percentiles, 35th in offensive rating, 35th percentile again in defensive rating. And I think really none of us have an answer as to why did this drop-off occur. And I think that's something that Cavs analysts like myself and others are still trying to really understand. Was it the injuries? Darius Garland with the toe. Evan Mobley had that ankle injury in the Indiana series. I think everything just seemed to dissipate once the playoffs started. Now, that Miami series, let's be honest, Miami was not a legitimate playoff threat. It really was not the test I think the Cavs needed in that first round to go up against a team like Indiana. And Indiana, honestly, was just the tougher, more physical team, and that's something that Cavs players talked about ad nauseum in the post-game press conference and exit interviews to this past season. So despite this, I still think there's hope, right? I think that there were a lot of factors. To me, it was the injuries, the fact that they did not play as tough. And those are things that can be corrected throughout the course of a long offseason and into the regular season. So despite these drop-offs that we saw, these statistical drop-offs in the postseason, I still think that there is hope for this Cavs starting unit. That's why I think there's really no need to change and make a drastic change in that starting lineup. The final small point I want to get to here was Isaac Okoro. So when it came to offense with Isaac Okoro with some of the starters this past season, this article discussed how the Cavs thrived in transition with Okoro on the floor, averaging 1.66 points per transition play. So in layman's terms, that's the 91st percentile, right? So the Cavs were better than 91% of the teams when it came to their effectiveness in transition. And so the problem is now with Okoro gone, it's really going to be Lonzo Ball who's going to have to fill that void. And I think the question is, with some of the knee problems he's had, hasn't really been consistently healthy throughout the course of his career, can he fill that void? He might not be able to run up and down the court as much as someone as Isaac Okoro, who is more athletic, but I think Lonzo Ball to make up for that, has the ball handling abilities. So we'll see if Lonzo can maybe get this team out in transition, continue that success, especially with that second unit. I feel like there's going to be a big 1-2 punch with Lonzo Ball and DeAndre Hunter coming off the bench, with guys like Sam Merrill and Dean Wade, who can provide that punch from the perimeter as well. So that's the big question. Can the ball handling of Lonzo Ball replace the athleticism and speed of Isaac Okoro this upcoming season? So a lot of really interesting questions, a lot of really interesting statistics regarding the past offense from the Cavs and maybe how this can play over into next season. But what are your thoughts on this Cavs offense? Obviously, a lot of faces gone, new faces in, but the system and the concepts still seem very similar. Obviously, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Cavs are favored to make the finals in the Eastern Conference, to represent the Eastern Conference in the NBA Finals, next year. So what are your thoughts? Who should be in the starting lineup? What changes should the Cavs make? Do the Cavs need to make changes? I want to hear what you want. I want to hear what you have to say in the comments below. So again, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the Cavs Digest YouTube channel. Always enjoy hearing your thoughts, listening to what you guys have to say. Until next time, I'll see you for another episode of Cavs Digest very soon. And until next time, thanks so much for watching. Have a good one, everybody.